Andrew, welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. I'm so looking forward to this conversation today. We're going to talk about HR and all things. But before we get into that, do you want to give people a little bit of a kind of a brief history of what brought you to where you are today?
Sure, and thank you. Just so good to be with you. Sure, I'm a lifelong, career-long HR guy. So I've been doing work in human resources both independently inside giant Fortune 50 enterprise organizations and really everything in between for the past 25 years. And I had this wonderful, in some ways, capstone experience about 4 years ago. I was the head of the human resources function at a real estate technology company that went public and got really big and is now known as Invitation Homes. And as part of the continued growth of that company, I went through a number of mergers and PE sponsor exits. I at one point pulled my golden parachute and the equity vested and the severance plan kicked in, and oh my goodness, that was like leaping off a cliff.
Mm,
But that has led to me being independent and now working with individuals and companies and investment organizations, helping them to help their organizations be more effective.
mm.
I wrote my bucket list book, Scaling for Success. It's behind me on camera. Um, and I put together a series of educational programs for other HR people, trying to help them navigate the experiences that we share,
Mm.
maybe with a little bit more gracefulness than I did in my many years, and stub toes and knocked knees.
I loved how you described that. I think it's from our mistakes and setbacks that is where we grow and where we learn and where we want to see the change that we want to make in the world as well, dare I say. And interestingly, kind of similar path to yourself, Andrew, coming up nearly 5 years ago, actually. And by the time this podcast comes out, it's probably around 5 years ago that I left a corporate career. Didn't have anything like a golden parachute. I had this parachute is actually a knapsack experience more so than a golden parachute. But I kind of reached a stage in my career where I thought I could have a bigger impact doing something different. I wasn't necessarily working to my strengths. I wasn't living my values, all of those kind of things that are quite important, I think, when it comes to work. But often people think that given my podcast and given the kinds of things that I talk about, that my background is in HR, but it's not. My background is more commercial. I worked with clients. I worked mostly in agencies in fast moving consumer goods and, delivered projects to clients, analytics, delivering presentations, building revenue, all of that kind of stuff. So kind of different to HR, but I also have that commercial mindset when it comes to talking about business as well, which I think is a benefit. So maybe where we'll start, given your background, like what are the big challenges that you see for HR? And interestingly, before we kind of go on to that, I just want to maybe say back to you what you said. It's like all of the shared things that we have, and I think HR in particular they have a unique set of skills and a unique set of experiences at work that are not found in other parts of the organization. Would I be right? Would it be fair to say that?
I think that's right.
Mm,
I may make up a term on the spot here, and we'll see if it sticks or not.
love it.
I feel as though human resources professionals are the insider outsiders, or
Mm,
maybe they're the outsider insiders. That's maybe more accurate. The outsider insiders, where you're often part of the leadership team. You're often aware of how decisions are made inside an organization, but you're not always strongly influencing how those decisions are made.
yeah.
You're often carrying out the decisions
Mm,
of the senior leadership team, and maybe you're at the table, but you're often bringing the donuts,
mm,
rather than being part of the core decision making group.
yeah.
And that's something that I'm very actively trying to change and
Mm,
help other HR people grow and evolve out of it. But it is this interesting role where you're straddling a number of different stakeholder interests. You're looking out for the best interests of your workers. You're trying to help the organization meet its financial goals. You're trying to help the organization maintain a strong long-term reputation. You're trying to help the investors, get a return on their investment. There are all these stakeholders that have competing interests, and the HR professional ends up being stretched in a thin and often awkward way between those different groups.
Mm. So would you say they're the kind of two main challenges that you see? So the first one being that HR, while they may have a seat at the table, they're not actually making any decisions. So companies, even if they have a CHRO, they kind of maybe default to the finance for the ultimate decision when something needs to happen. And then the second one being that the unique challenge of trying to manage multiple competing stakeholders. Would that be fair to say? Anything else to add on top of those?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with the competing stakeholders for sure.
Mm.
That's a challenge, and I don't think it's quite as binary as you make all the decisions or you make none of the decisions. It's
Okay,
more
yeah,
about how do you interact with
yeah.
the other members of the senior team,
Mm.
and happy to expand on this, and have a strong personal and professional view of many human resources professionals with very good intentions find themselves naturally gravitating towards a servant or service-oriented
Mm.
style of work. I'm going to, ensure that people have an excellent experience, and I will be massively responsive to your needs. Um, but that only takes you so far in your role unless you elevate and think about who are all these other stakeholders, what do they need? Maybe what we need, instead of this question about your benefits beneficiary being answered today, maybe what we actually need is some form of program around recruitment and retention for the organization. And nobody's asking for that. It's up to you as the leader to identify the need, advocate for it, get support, and make it happen. And so there's an elevation that can occur within the function that I don't think enough people are taking a hold of.
So it's kind of going from a reactive mindset, so like kind of looking at the
Yeah,
employees and what they need, to more of a proactive, strategic. How do we think about the bigger picture here, and what do we need to think about in advance of it actually happening? So we need to think about things like employee engagement and retention before it becomes an issue, because once it becomes an issue, then it becomes a kind of a bigger hole to fix, if you like. So it's kind of helping HR, let's say, to think a little bit more strategically so
yeah,
that they can
yeah.
have a better influence within the organization.
That's exactly the language that I use to try to, make it as clear as possible. I try to help other HR people be more strategic. And what does that
Brilliant.
mean? And what does that look like? And what do you
Yeah.
do to
Yeah.
do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what do you think are the biggest challenges when people first, now I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Is the biggest challenge that people don't know that they need to be strategic, or do they have a challenge with becoming more strategic, developing that strategic thinking mindset?
Yeah, great acknowledgement. It's different, intellectually, and boy, you will hear people talk about it regularly. I want a seat at the table. I need to be strategic. I'm a strategic human resources leader, and usually, if you say that you are, it means that you're not, because you're, overly focused on it, but not actually doing the activities. Um, I condense it down to say being strategic is deciding what's important right now,
Mm.
deciding what to work on. And you encapsulated it really nicely about that's being more proactive than reactive. It's being more broadly aware of who your stakeholders are and what they care about. And it's leading the conversation rather than saluting when someone else tells you what to do. Like, sure, you should speak with the executive team and the CEO and ask them what they think is important. But you're not really leading your function if you're, taking direction from someone else
Yeah.
about your function, right?
Mm.
It's up to you as a leader within your function, as a strategic leader, to think about what's important to do right now.
Mm. Mm. And make those decisions, and you can of course, have input from other people, but the
Sure.
ultimate decision is yours. And I suppose that needs to be really, really clear. And I suppose coming back, so people know that they need to be strategic. So maybe it's a jump in how how to be perceived as strategic, or how to actually act in a strategic way. Would that be fair to say?
So many human resources professionals enter this field because we want to help people,
Mm,
right? It is a core part of our identity. We want to help people. We want to help people be happier. We want to answer their questions, meet their needs. We have this strong desire to serve others. And when taken to an extreme, that can work against us because to use a restaurant analogy, we're constantly bringing the cheeseburger with a great smile and we're getting a great tip,
mm,
but we're not taking the opportunity to think about, well, how do we increase traffic at our restaurant? What should be on our menu?
mm,
What's the appropriate pricing to make this restaurant be as profitable as possible? We get focused on service delivery
mm.
at the loss of attention on larger, broader, more strategic needs for the organization as a whole.
Brilliant. And I love the analogy that you use. It really kind of hits home when you're talking about things like, and decide what pricing it should be. It's like, well, that's kind of, to me, that says we need to think strategically about our salary, look at our compensation packages, and, how are we going to get more foot traffic? How are we going to attract more people to this organization? And what do we need to do in order to do that? And, do you see more and more HR people becoming the strategic partners in business? Like, do you see, or maybe, and I don't know if there are statistics for this, but what percentage would you say are kind of operating in this service-based model versus the strategic thinking, and what do we need to do in order to make that shift, to make it more of a strategic role?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, I'd start by saying not everyone needs to be,
Mm,
not everyone should be
yeah.
strategic,
Mm,
right? A restaurant needs outstanding servers. You need a
yeah.
lot of them. You need a
Mm,
lot more great servers at a restaurant than you do general managers who are thinking about pricing and flow. But if all you have are servers and no one is thinking about how to improve the health of that enterprise, then you're missing out. So I'd say less than 20% of HR roles really need to be strategic and
mm.
think about the org as a whole. But of that group, less than 20, less than 10% actually are strategic.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of that, hey, I blame the hiring managers, right? A lot of the hiring managers don't know what to look for.
Mm,
If you're a CEO, if you're a business leader, and you have never seen what strategic HR looks like and how it interacts with you, then you don't know how to select for it, and you don't know how to empower that person, properly. And I've seen more and more organizations do two things. One is assign those strategic management responsibilities to another department. You have a COO that makes these
yeah.
decisions about
Mm,
programs and processes and aligning goals and priorities. Or you have a CAO, where you have a chief of staff. That's become a very popular role. So one is activities that would often go to the strategic HR leader go to another seat at the table. So someone takes your seat essentially.
mm,
And another is that organizations are hiring people from outside HR into the top HR seat. I've seen more
mm,
and more consultants from McKinsey and Bain slide over from a chief of staff role, or some sort of high level high powered individual moves into the function from outside the function because they're bringing a skill set that is frankly pretty rare
mm.
in the function today.
Yeah. 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 And do you
Yeah,
think that's a good thing then, to have someone at that senior level, but they're lacking in that HR experience?
certainly not
Mm,
ideal,
mm,
right? Ideally, you would, well, if you look across all the organizations in the country or the world, there should probably be some blend of, it's not all or nothing, right? Everybody from outside or everybody from inside. But what I'm seeing is that the mix seems to be awkwardly proportioned,
okay.
where there could be a lot more people coming up from within the function. We could be
Mm,
doing more to develop ourselves. We could be doing more to develop each other,
mm,
to help broaden that awareness and deepen those skills.
mm. And when it comes to hiring, or this could apply also to promotion within, what are the kind of things that those managers, those senior leaders need to be looking out for someone to be put into one of those strategic HR roles?
Yeah. Um, I'd say it's ensuring that your HR leader is a business person first. And you can't just count on the HR person saying, I'm a business person first, because we default to that just as frequently as we say we want or need a seat at the table, right? These have become well-rehearsed lines.
Mm,
Um, one screening question that a CEO or president or division leader could ask candidates for roles on her team could be, how do you decide what's important in the human
mm,
resources role? And here I'll say something a little controversial. I'd suggest that if the HR candidate leads with something about making people happy, something about employee advocacy,
mm,
that they may be overly focused on one particular stakeholder group
mm,
at the expense of the broader stakeholders. So the right answer to that question is, how do you decide what to work on? Would be, um, we together will select the right things that will help our organization meet its goals,
mm. Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
it's often this massive logic leap from, we're going to make our workers as happy as possible, and then that'll take care of the company.
Mm.
Well, there's some very strong limitations to that. And boy, you could pay everybody triple what they're making today, and they would be quite happy with that. Or move to the 4-hour work week that Tim Ferriss talks about. They'd be quite happy with that as well, I imagine. But the organization wouldn't exist very long.
Mm,
So, steering away from the overly focused position of advocating for one particular stakeholder group. It's usually the workers.
mm,
To broadening your perspective around, my role as a strategic HR leader exists to help the company meet its goals. Now, often that means that I'm trying to figure out how to attract and retain workers, sure, but that's within the context of, how can we be profitable? How can we grow? How can we be a sustaining enterprise?
mm. Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. Um, I mean, I could have so much to add to that in terms of focusing on people and how profits tend to follow when you put more of the focus on making sure that people are happier at work. And it doesn't necessarily have to mean paying them triple the amount, although, like you say, I'm sure people would be very, very happy with that. Um, Kind of moving more towards the C-suite now and thinking of those strategic roles, do you see any challenges around getting HR their own seat at the table rather than defaulting, like you said earlier, to say a COO or equivalent?
Yeah. But there's a saying that I've heard, and I guess I'm using it now. Dress for the job that you want,
Hmm.
right? So do the work. Uh,
Yeah.
Approach the work in a thoughtful, balanced, broad perspective way,
Hmm.
and that will increase the respect that the senior leadership team has for you and for your role. If you are a tightly focused advocate for one particular group or a social cause or whatever it is, then you will be viewed as such, as an advocate. I think about my days in a unionized workforce. The union steward that's pounding the table and arguing for the benefit of their constituents at the expense of the company
Hmm.
is not often invited to the table.
Yeah.
Don't be the union steward,
Hmm.
right? You want to be an executive who's making decisions and setting priorities with the health of the overall enterprise in mind. So dress for the job that you want. Do
Yeah,
the
that
work.
going back to this idea that, or sorry, going back to this point you made earlier, that you need to have that business head about you. You need to understand the commercial realities of being in business. And I suppose thinking about it from the perspective of, let's say, the CEO or other C-suite members, where traditionally HR haven't had that seat, how do we convince them? Maybe convince is the wrong word, but how do
Yeah,
we advocate for the HR to have that seat at that level? So rather than kind of, I suppose, attacking it from both sides, if you like. So as a
right,
HR
right.
person, this is what you need to do. But if you're listening to this and you are at that C-suite level, but you don't have a separate HR person who's at that level and making those strategic decisions, how do we advocate for that?
Yeah, yeah. More specifically, more practically and tactically, what are the activities and behaviors that you would do to do the work? One method that I've helped teach people about is waterfall planning. That's kind of a big fuzzy term. It's aligning the goals of the organization. What are the top 3 things that your organization's trying to accomplish with the goals of your function or your department? And those should be pretty closely linked. Like if you're trying to, and HR often finds itself out on HR Island, where we're working on HRE things that are important to us as a function, but might be disconnected from the most important goals of the company as a whole.
Mm,
And lots of stuff comes back to recruitment and retention and optimizing the productivity of the workforce. So let's use an example. Let's say that you want your organization to decrease its cost of customer acquisition or expand into Europe. Those are pretty common, pretty big ticket, top level company goals. What could your HR function do to support those goals? How do we decrease the cost of customer acquisition? One could be looking at workforce planning in your marketing and sales team to try to figure out how to optimize the effectiveness of those teams. So it might be a sales training program for your inside sales team. That could decrease the cost of customer acquisition. It could be designing a new incentive plan to drive increased cross-sell. That's another idea. It could be sourcing a new director of the European market sales team to help with that expansion. Those are very specific things that once you link them to those overall company goals become obvious around, well, of course that would drive the company goals, but I've got to do all this other stuff. I've got to pay people and we've got benefit enrollment and we've got complaints to deal with. And yes, all that stuff needs to happen. That's the keep the business running stuff that should be happening in the background that you don't need to talk about, that you don't need to put on a slide or a presentation. Yes, all that stuff needs to happen. What are your most important things? That helps you prioritize, it helps your team prioritize, that helps the leadership team understand that you get it, that you get what's most important to the organization. So both from the HR seat and from the leadership seat, look for that alignment and try to make that alignment very, very clear. And, you could do it on one page with, almost an org chart sort of waterfall flow. But, continuing to stick with that talk track and keeping your focus where it belongs,
I think it's,
will help you.
yeah, I mean, I really, really like that example that you've used. I think it's pretty powerful. It's very, you can picture exactly how that would relate, I think. And from the other side, it's like, that's very tactical, exactly as you said. It's the day-to-day stuff that needs to keep happening in order to keep the business running versus the top down, the bottom up versus the top down stuff that needs to happen. And it's knowing that you need to focus on the top down. Maybe let's dive into the challenges associated with that, and I'm, like I say, never worked in HR, but I'm coming at this from the perspective of, but I need to make sure that all this stuff happens on a day-to-day basis. Otherwise,
right.
X, Y, and Z is going to happen. So how do you shift maybe from that mentality of, but I have to keep all of this stuff going because otherwise, the company's going to fail, or we're going to have a lawsuit, or we're going to have this, and this, how do I shift my thinking towards I need to prioritize those strategic priorities for the
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah, it's a really common concern and common objection, right? It's not like we have scads of free time that we can be strategic during. There's work, there's need, there are
Mm.
requests, there are demands on our time. I work often with smaller organizations, often venture-backed or PE-backed, that aren't deeply resourced, often teams of one or two HR people. And so how do you do all the stuff, do all the keep the business running stuff, and air quote, be strategic and think
Mm.
about and act upon all these like higher order needs? And I'd suggest that it doesn't necessarily require a lot of extra time.
Mm.
It's not additional time. And frankly, to use the Stephen Covey terms, these should be your big rocks. These
Yeah.
should be your big rocks that get attention first.
Yeah.
There's a famous video I like to show it for a lot of my clients of like, if you put all the sand and the gravel in first, the
The
rocks
rocks don't fit. Yeah.
don't fit
Yeah.
in the bowl, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So put the big rocks in the bowl first. Like
Mm.
what is necessary to drive the success of your organization? Do that first.
Mm.
And maybe somebody that asked you a question about benefits, maybe they can wait until tomorrow
Yeah.
rather than do it as soon as it comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It comes
So
back to this.
prioritizing.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many ideas now based on that, but it's coming back to this idea of being more strategic and less reactive. So that, to use your example of the question about benefits, what I've started doing now is putting an out of office on my emails to say, I check my emails twice a day, and here's anything that you might need to know. So here's how to work with me, here's how to book a call with me, here's how to, and there's a list of all of these. Here's how to get in touch relating to the podcast. Please don't use this email address. It's this other email address. Here's how to listen to the podcast. Here's the free resources that you might want to download. So I put all of that in my out of office, which means that, there's a lot of stuff there that could go away. So coming back to your example of the question about benefits, or could there be a place where, here's an out of office. I check my
Right.
emails twice a day. Here's where you can go to an FAQ. You can go to the intranet to find out about what your benefits are. You can reach out to the provider that we use, or,
Yeah.
is there, I'm always looking at ways, you mentioned earlier that organizations are concerned with things like recruitment, retention, and productivity. I'm obsessed with this idea of productivity. How do you make things more efficient? And maybe that's the challenge that a lot of people face, that they're so busy being busy that they're just keeping
Yes.
themselves busy and busy and busy.
Yeah, I'd suggest that most people are aware of a lot of these productivity hacks, right?
Yeah.
The time blocking, the asynchronous work,
Mm.
the batching of email responses. I mean, those are all good and important things. The task lists, the the technology systems that help you filter through these things. I'd suggest that the root cause might be more internal. The root cause is that many of us really care about people, and we want to be responsive, and we have this self-identity, this bit of ego that we define our success and our value as how quickly and how friendly we are transacting the service for the people that we work with. And so the internal mindset needs to shift to be effective, right? You won't use the productivity hack if you can't get your mind wrapped around your role changes, or your role has a strategic component that maybe you need to pay a bit more attention to.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And that comes up, it has come up a few times on the podcast in the past, this idea of having a mindset shift to, and we kind of dug in a little bit deeper around beliefs, and you're talking about identity. So if I identify my success or my value as a human being, or as a value as a colleague, by being reactive, by answering emails within a couple of minutes,
Right.
or within a couple of hours, whatever it might be, that if I attach my value to that, it's quite hard to get away from that thinking. If I and I go through this myself. I check my emails twice a day, but I'm still tempted to go in and check just to make sure nothing urgent has come in. So, I think I suppose what I'm trying to say is it's a hard, long process in shifting
Yeah.
your mindset, and it's taking small steps at a time to get there, but really insightful that could be something that's actually holding people back from being more strategic, is what's going on for themselves and how they perceive themselves and the value that they add to the organization.
Yep. Yep. And hey, when you feel under pressure, you often default back to
Mm,
your most comfortable behaviors. And so if you get busy and stressed and there's a lot to do, you may find yourself, working on the sand and the gravel more often, or being more directly responsive and kicking the can on
yeah.
some of these bigger ticket items. And I might extend it. Like I specialize, because my entire career was in human resources. I specialize in working with HR people, but the same principles are at work in
Mm.
any function.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I
Whether,
find it so relatable as well. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and the motivations may be a little different. Like, thinking about a sales force, instead of being, this, strong tendency to being a helper and, a servant leader in sales, often you're trying to close deals, you're trying to talk with
Mm,
customers. And so attending to the management aspects of your work, prioritizing and planning and giving feedback to your team, those aren't um, well-developed muscles for many successful salespeople. And so you might tend to get more hands-on.
mm,
And same for engineering. You might be in the code rather than doing the planning and prioritizing. So
mm.
the principles apply to any function.
Mm, absolutely, 100%. And I think, bringing it back to the individual level, if people are thinking, if they want to progress their career, if they want to develop their skills, if they want to get better at doing what they're currently doing, then it really is about making that shift towards more strategic thinking and actually prioritizing the time for that, at the expense maybe of being this person who you've always been, is the reactive, the helping other people. It's moving away from that, and even to take it a step further, maybe thinking about ways that people can serve themselves, that they can help themselves, because that takes you then out of the equation completely, that they can access the information they need and you don't need to be there to provide that information to them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The mindset shift, the personal identity shift, is not something that can happen overnight,
Mm,
snapping my fingers. It doesn't
yeah.
just, you
It's not
blink
like a
and it
hypnosis or
occurs,
whatever. Yeah.
right? It's not like a great article that you read and then all of a sudden,
Mm,
or you drop a prioritization matrix
mm,
on your desk on a sticky note. It's really the combination of a lot of different things,
mm,
right? It's having a group of people that will support each other.
mm,
It's continuing to read and be aware of tactics on the topic. It's having someone to call you on it or hold you accountable when you stray from the path. And if you can piece together enough of these reinforcements,
mm,
then you can make a change
mm.
over time. Yeah.
Some,
And again, I just really want to emphasize, like, the world needs great servant leaders. The
mm,
world needs great service delivery folk. And that's work that you can be very proud of, and that's valuable work. What I focus on is this real tiny niche of strategic HR professionals that I think is underserved. And I think
mm,
there are more people that could be more successful in the senior strategic
mm.
executive ranks if
Yeah.
they attended to the bigger picture.
I think, I mean, even to build on that, Andrew, the impact that HR has at work. So if you can impact on those people to help them to be more successful and more strategic, the knock-on impact of that throughout the entire organization, I think it would be really, really felt. The other thing I was going to add in relation to trying this and the mindset shift is just trying stuff and being prepared to fail. Trying things and reflecting and seeing what's working and what's not working, and trying again and trying again. And, if it's not working the first time, maybe it will work the next time. Um, Yeah, I mean, we've talked about a lot of different things in relation to strategic HR. Is there anything in particular you feel that we haven't covered that you'd like to, a point that you'd like to get across today?
Oh my. Um,
Have I opened a
I-
can of worms?
it's a it's obviously a favorite topic, and
Mm,
it's an area that I have lived through the school of hard knocks myself
mm,
on this. Yeah, I guess I would just emphasize to the audience that you can be as successful as you choose to be, and as you are willing to allow yourself to adapt and shape over time. And I think being strategic is a choice. I think supporting your organization is something that we could wrap our minds around a little bit better, and get out of our own way sometimes from just doing, like, let's look up and figure out what where are we going and what could we do to be most useful.
mm. Yeah, yeah. I love that approach. Um, I mean, I suppose something that's coming up for me, there's obviously people who are in privileged situations, it's a little bit easier for them. Other people, maybe issues around diversity and biases at work and that sort of stuff. So I just wanted to call that out in case anyone's listening and going, well, it's easy for you to say, from a privileged situation that you can be as successful as you want. Not everyone has necessarily the same level of opportunity. And I suppose I just wanted to call that out for listeners as well, in case someone's listening and thinking, oh, that's not me. That's not me. I'm having all of these challenges at work. So just wanted to kind of raise awareness, make people aware of that. Um, Now, the question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast is, what does being happier at work mean to you?
Um, Boy, what does being happier at work mean to me? Actually, I will refer back to some work by a company called Gartner, um, which recently bought CEB, Conference Executive Board, which does a lot of benchmarking and data collection. And boy, this sounds very academic, doesn't it? So what does being happier at work mean to me? Their definition, tied to employee engagement surveys. And there are happiness or satisfaction surveys. And they were digging into the data around, okay, well, what do you get out of happiness? What do you get out of satisfaction? And they identified two outcomes that were most strongly related. And one is intention to stay, and the second is discretionary effort.
Mm,
And so if you are happy at work, if you're engaged, if you're satisfied, and I give all credit to Gartner for uncovering this, you are more likely to want to continue to be a part of that organization.
mm,
You're less likely to leave. You're also more likely to care more and do
mm.
more and be more proactive at that organization. So yeah, I guess I'd put a bow on it. What does being happier at work mean? It means that you want to continue to be a part of an organization. You want to contribute more.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. I love that. Really kind of synopsizes what being happier at work like. And what I talk about all the time is, yeah, you want to stay in the organization for longer, which saves organizations money. And if you're putting in that discretionary effort, if you're being more proactive than reactive and doing additional work, that has a benefit for organizations as well, has a benefit for the individual, has a benefit for the teams. Now, Andrew, if people want to connect with you, if they want to reach out, find out a bit more about you, what you do, your book, any events or anything like that, any programs that you have coming up, you can let them know.
Yeah, well, thanks for the softball there. Yeah. Please, anyone listening still at this point, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm out there all the time, and put kind of a lot of content out in the world that is hopefully interesting or useful. And if you're interested, if you're a human resources leader that wants to be more strategic, that wants to be more successful in your role, I run a variety of different programs, from cohort executive MBA style programs to one-on-one mentoring. Check that out. You can connect to all of it through my LinkedIn. But People Leader Accelerator is that flagship program where we help heads of HR do some pretty interesting stuff.
Mm. And
So
does that tie in with a lot of what we talked about today?
Sure
Brilliant.
does. Sure
Brilliant.
does.
Love that. And we've just recently connected on LinkedIn, so I'm looking forward to interacting with your content, and hopefully you'll find value in the content that I put out there as well. I'd love to say thank you so much for your time today, Andrew. Really enjoyed that conversation. Love getting into the nitty-gritty of, how to be more strategic, how to create happier working environments, how to help everyone to succeed and be more successful at work. So really appreciate you taking the time today. Thank you.
Thank you.